a single step beyond the limits of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson warned us that is the foundation for unlimited power. Going back to the years leading up to 1776, they say it was all about a tiny tax, a mere 3 pence on tea. But that's absurd. It was really about the precedent and the power behind it all. That principle that a single step leads to total tyranny, that was the foundation of American independence. So on this episode, from the Revolution all the way back to ancient Greece, the founders knew that history proves the danger of a single unconstitutional step, because what they take today, they never give back. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, December 10th, 2025. Now, the entire American Revolution was built on a hard truth. If you tolerate even the smallest usurpation of power, the smallest step beyond the limits of the Constitution, that will eventually snowball into total tyranny. It's like a deadly disease. That's how John Adams described it, writing as Novanglis in early 1775. He said, the nature of the encroachment upon the American Constitution is such as to grow every day more and more encroaching. Like a cancer, it eats faster and faster every hour. Now, later that year, with this kind of understanding, a fiery young 19-year-old Alexander Hamilton zeroed in on the only question that really mattered. He said, what then is the subject of our controversy with the mother country? And to answer that question, he first questioned the motives of the people who were basically trying to fool the public into believing that it was merely a dispute over, well, basically pocket change. He said, what can actuate those men who labor to delude any of us into an opinion that the object of contention between the parent state and the colonies is only 3 pence duty on tea? Hamilton argued that this was absolute nonsense to focus on the cost, especially such a small cost. The real battle was against a government that was claiming unlimited power. He said the Parliament claims a right to tax us in all cases whatsoever. Its late acts are in virtue of that claim. How ridiculous, then, is it to affirm that we are quarreling for the trifling sum of 3 pence a pound on tea, when it is evidently the principle against which we contend? James Madison knew his history, and he understood exactly what made the American Revolution a success. He explained decades later that the United States wouldn't even exist if the founders and the old revolutionaries hadn't spotted the massive danger hidden inside that single step, that tiny tax. He wrote, the people of the United States owe their independence and their liberty to the wisdom of descrying in the minute tax of 3 pence on tea the magnitude of the evil comprised in the precedent. And then Madison continued with a warning that I think is absolutely timeless. You have to continue with that same wisdom, that same watchful, vigilant eye. And he invoked an ancient warning that went back now a couple thousand years. He said, let them exert the same wisdom in watching against every evil lurking under plausible disguises and growing up from small beginnings. And he closed that out with a Latin phrase that they all understood, that was essential to the American Revolution that, well, most Americans today have no clue about. Obsta principiis. And that maxim comes from the Roman poet Ovid. It means you must stop the disease right at the start. Because later on, if you wait too long, even if you find a cure, it could be, well, too late. This is the English translation. Resist beginnings. Too late is the medicine prepared when the disease has gained strength by long delay. Now, fast forward back to the American Revolution, And James Otis Jr., writing in 1767 as Freeborn American, I love that username, he made that ancient principle America's operating rule. Every violation of rights, every violation, no matter how small, it demanded an immediate response. He said, "It is, my countrymen, of the utmost consequence that we boldly oppose the least infraction of our charter and rights as men. Obsta principiis is a maxim never to be forgot. If we do not resist at the first attack, it may soon be too late." Jonathan Mayhew took that warning to the pulpit in his famous sermon, The Snare Broken. He preached that preserving liberty means you gotta wake up and stay that way, or you're never even gonna see those first steps. He said, for those who would preserve and perpetuate their liberties, to guard them with a wakeful attention, and in all righteous, just, and prudent ways, to oppose the first encroachments on them. And then he used that same phrase, obsta principiis. After a while, it will be too late. And from there, using a well-known biblical parable, I believe this is from the Gospel of Matthew, Mayhew warned us exactly what happens when the people fall asleep on the job. The enemy, those are the people who are violating the Constitution and your liberty, well, they embed the corruption so deep that you can't destroy it without tearing down absolutely everything. He said, for in the states and kingdoms of this world, it happens as it does in the field or church, according to the well-known parable to this purpose, that while men sleep, then the enemy cometh and soweth tares, which cannot be rooted out again till the end of the world, without rooting out the wheat with them. Now, to the founders, this wasn't just a Latin slogan. This wasn't just a principle. It was a history lesson. They knew about it right from the history books. They read about it. They learned about it. They knew it happened over and over again. A famous example comes from John Dickinson in his Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania, published in 1767. In letter number 9, he pointed to a well-known example from Spain. He said Spain was once free. Their Cortes resembled our parliaments. No money could be raised on the subject without their consent. No taxation without representation, that kind of mentality. They had that in Spain. He said one of their kings, having received a grant from them to maintain a war against the Moors, desired that if the sum which they had given should not be sufficient, he might be allowed, for that emergency only, to raise more money without assembling the Cortes. That should sound real familiar. For that emergency only has always been the cry of tyrants, emergency power. Now, the good guys, as Dickinson pointed out, they fought against it, and they fought a pretty good fight, but they lost. And in the end, that single step is what set the stage for unlimited power in the future. He said the request was violently opposed by the best and wisest men in the assembly. It was, however, complied with by the votes of the majority. And this single concession, one single step in an emergency, this single concession was a precedent for other concessions of the like kind, until at last the crown obtained a general power of raising money in cases of necessity. And they never recovered from that fatal mistake, that single step in a single emergency. That's what destroyed freedom. He said from that period, the Cortes ceased to be useful and the people ceased to be free. And he closed off that 9th letter with the same essential and timeless warning. Oppose a disease at its beginning. Of course, it wasn't just Spain. Samuel Adams also identified the French following this same path to destruction. This is known as the fatal moment in 1439. He said France afterwards fell into the same snare. Adams understood it was a trap, and in Cato's letters number 76, Thomas Gordon explained exactly how that trap was sprung. King Charles VII asked for the power to tax on his own authority rather than getting approval from the legislature, of course, for an emergency situation. This was like the Spanish. It was for war, but this time was to fund a standing army against the British. The Estates General, basically their legislature of the time, they said no at first, but they eventually said yes, thinking, of course, it was just for that crisis, just for that urgent emergency. And here's how Gordon described it. I have read somewhere of the states of a country who, having wildly granted to their prince a power of raising money by his own authority in cases of great necessity, every case ever afterwards was a case of great necessity. Well, that should not be a surprise. If you allow people with power to determine that there's an emergency that gives them extra power, everything is going to be an emergency all the time. Gordon continued, and his necessities multiplied so fast that the whole wealth of the country was swallowed up to supply them. Now back to Samuel Adams, he showed how fast this all snowballed. The first king, he started out with kind of a modest sum, but the next guy, well, he quickly tripled it. And then the kings after just kept taking more and more and more until they stripped the people of basically everything. He wrote, Charles VII, who began them, never raised annually more than 180,000 pounds. His son Louis XI almost trebled the revenue. And since then, all that the kingdom and people had, even to their skins, has hardly been thought sufficient for their kings. Going back to the ancients, in his 1771 Massacre Day oration, James Lovell went all the way back to ancient Greece, and he found the exact same pattern in a situation that was well known at the time. He said, Athens once was free, a citizen, a favorite of the people, by an artful story, gained a trifling guard of 50 men. Artful story meaning, well, he lied about something. We'll get to that in a moment. He continued, ambition taught him, so he got this small, trifling guard of 50 men, but he used that single step to build it into something much greater. Ambition taught him ways to enlarge that number. He destroyed the Commonwealth and made himself the tyrant of the Athenians. Now, this is the story of a guy named Pisistratus. And as David Hume explained, Pisistratus actually used a false flag. That was the artful story. He staged an attack on himself to create a justification to give himself a small guard. That small guard eventually was expanded into a standing army that destroyed the liberty of the people. He said Pisistratus, the Athenian, who cut and wounded his own body, and making the people believe that his enemies had committed the violence, obtained a guard for his person. And this is really a powerful example because they all understood that first single step, it started with a seemingly pathetic force, just again, 50 men, and they were armed with, well, really just wooden clubs. And that single step was the foundation for total tyranny. Back to Gordon. Pisistratus, having procured from the city of Athens 50 fellows armed only with cudgels for the security of his person from false and lying dangers, and improve them into an army, and by it enslaved that free state. A single step was the foundation for total tyranny. And these are not random tragedies separated by centuries. They're the same story repeating because, as John Dickinson explained, this is in his broadside urging resistance and noncompliance to the Stamp Act in 1765, power operates on an iron principle. What they take, they never give back. He said, power is of a tenacious nature. What it seizes, it will retain. Knowing this history, it's easy to understand why George Washington called unconstitutional power a weapon that destroys freedom, even if you like the results. He said, "Let there be no change by usurpation. For though this, in one instance, may be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed." And that brings us back full circle to Thomas Jefferson. He understood that even a single tiny step beyond the limits of the Constitution, that's the foundation for unlimited power. He wrote, "To take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specially drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition." Now, obviously, that's the bad news. And there is a lot of bad news all around us for all of our lives. And that's because, well, that single step was taken well before any of us were born. But there's actually some good news from St. George Tucker. It's really never game over. He said, "The acquiescence of the people of a state under any usurped authority for any length of time can never deprive them of the right of resuming the sovereign power into their own hands whenever they think fit or are able to do so, since that right is perfectly unalienable." The founders' warning about a single step. It might be the most important constitutional lesson there is, but it's definitely not the kind of thing you'll learn about in the government-run and government-approved so-called education system. And that's a big part of the reason why we work so hard every single day here at the TAC to reach and teach more and more people about these essential foundational principles from the founders and the old revolutionaries and the great thinkers that they read and learn from. And nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way today over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, it's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out. I'd be extremely grateful for any consideration you can give to joining us today. Now, if you don't want to become a member, or if you already are a member, first of all, thank you, but want to make an additional or a one-time contribution to support us, you can do that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Beyond the dirty fiat, we, of course, accept other forms of payment and even some real money like gold back, etc. You'll find all that information over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. There's also a bunch of free and easy peasy things you can do to help us spread the word, primarily by triggering the algorithms of the mainstream platforms you watch or listen on. All the stuff that you can do to engage with those platforms, well, it tells the algorithm to show us to more people, and it helps out a ton. The biggest one is watch time percentage, for example, on the video platforms like YouTube. A 20-minute video that you watch for 20 minutes is 100%. That's very good. But if you watch it for 40 minutes, that's 200%, 60 minutes, so on. You get the idea. I won't keep rambling on that. You can also hit the like button, subscribe, get notifications. Comments in the archive is a big one. Reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform. All that stuff. I really appreciate your support, whether it's financial, otherwise, or all the above. Again, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was interesting, maybe a little entertaining here and there, but more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Again, I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. I hope you have an awesome day, and I look forward to seeing you next time here on the Path to Liberty.